into the Washington National Cathedral, all sense of time slips away. Construction of the cathedral began at the end of the 19th century, and for over 80 years, craftsmen painstakingly created each wall, each carving, and each spire completely by hand as a monument to the glory of God. But a cathedral is more than a great stone building. It is an expression of a community's faith in God. In 1955, a need was seen to adorn the cathedral with the color, warmth, and functionality of needlepoint kneelers. Luann Vega is the director of visitor services at the cathedral and a member of the cathedral's Needlepoint Guild. She says needlework adds to the cathedral's story.
There's nothing just for pure decoration. So all of our kneelers, and we kneel to pray in this cathedral, and that's why we have the needlepoint kneelers, all of them fit into the chapel where they were made. Each one of the chapels has a message, and so the needlepoint fits in with that message.
Individual volunteers from across the country have stitched each of the cathedral's 1,500 needleworks. The kneelers reflect a complete range of human experience. There's even a separate chapel with miniature furnishings and needlepoint to fascinate children.
Things that children would delight in and understand. And of course there's Noah's Ark and angels and many other things that appeal to children.
10 miles away in Beltsville, Maryland, the Lutheran Church of the Abiding Presence offers a very different worship experience. The church has around 300 members, and its suburban setting contrasts with the Gothic grandeur of the cathedral. The Reverend Michael H. Taylor has been pastor of the church since 1980. In 1989, along with the congregation's president Frank Hickerson, Taylor oversaw the construction of a new, modern sanctuary.
With faith in Jesus Christ, this work is begun, and this ground is broken in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
We had built this new church, the nave and narthex and all of that, but we really couldn't afford to decorate it very properly, and it's a very plain building. And I kept trying to think of ways that would bring some color and vibrancy into the building. I happened to be looking at the Lutheran magazine, which is our national magazine, and I was seeing some articles about churches that were doing hand work, needlepoint cushions and things like that. So I came in one morning and was talking to my secretary, David Dwiggins. And we got to discussing it and thought it was a great idea, you know, that would really be something we could do, get people involved, and add some beauty to the church. And then besides that, we had a very prominent member to die, Frank Hickerson, and we had a considerable amount of money that had been given in his memory. And I was also trying to figure an appropriate way to use that money, that it would be done in memory of him.
I'm sort of a great researcher, so I went to the National Cathedral and started asking questions. And I am not really all that familiar with needlepoint. It was a new thing for me, and I went to them and they started the ball rolling. We go out to them and say, look at your church. What is your message? What is the name? Is it St. Luke's? And so you want symbols of St. Luke. Is it a story of all saints? And what do you have in the fenestration around your windows? What do you have carved on the altar rail? What do you have carved on the baptismal font? What architectural feature is special? Maybe the arches, maybe one of the doors. There are all these extra things within the church that you don't even notice. But then by incorporating that onto your needlepoint, you've made something that belongs only to your church, exclusively to your church, and is a part of what it is you are about as you're worshiping and living and enjoying life within that church.
A needlepoint committee was formed to consider all aspects of creating needlepoint kneelers for the sanctuary. Liz Morse was a member of the committee.
I think the committee as a whole had come up with some ideas before we even chose an artist, a theme of the abiding presence. We got designers' names from all over the place. We got a few from the cathedral. We got a few from just talking to people. We kind of picked up names all over the place. And one of the names submitted to us was Mrs. Kapickian.
I first heard about it when I received a letter from the woman who afterwards directed the whole project, inquiring about whether or not I knew. I think this is what happened. whether I knew some artists who might be interested in designing work for Abiding Presence. And of course I immediately thought of myself.
Catherine Kapickian is an ecclesiastical artist and the director of the Center for Arts and Religion at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. Kapickian's designs cover a wide range of mediums, including textiles, stained glass, and needlework. The committee considered different ways to go about the project. Some designers do the design, paint the canvas, and prepare kits for the stitchers. However, Kapickian's expertise was in the designing of the cushions, not in the execution of a project like this. Going this route meant the church would need to locate a needlepoint shop to transfer the design to canvas, furnish supplies, and provide technical expertise.
We were torn between taking the smoother, easier way and having kind of everything done for us and delivered back to us, or in effect, you know, going from Kathy to shop to upholster, you know, all ourselves. And it was a real temptation to go the other way, but yet we felt that Kathy's designs were so, they said so much. And Liz was very supportive and instrumental. I felt very strongly that Catherine Kapickian was the one that had the design that was far and above any of the others that were presented.
Why is that?
It just seemed to have a depth of theology that the others didn't have. The symbolism and just the total understanding of what we wanted in the project.
Kapickian's theological background and artistic experience were attractive to the committee, and they decided to commission her to design the kneelers.
She came and sat in the sanctuary a number of times, just went in there and sat and kind of took it all in, and that was, I think, very important in her end design.
And I did not want to go in there and project some sort of interior landscape. And I did not want to compete with the space. And so my initial encounter with the space, what I saw were the two large round stained glass windows high up. And I saw the baptismal font at the entrance of the sanctuary, and it seemed to me that those two items were very significant in terms of determining how one would work within that space. And I saw all the blue in those two windows as the water of baptism.
Because the Lutheran Church is pretty much grounded on word and sacrament, we decided to take the biblical theme and sort of the story of salvation history as in the Bible. We're also a liturgical church, which means we observe various seasons throughout the year. And so that also is portrayed in the cushions as well, as you go not only through the story of salvation as presented in the Bible, but today as we go through each season of the year remembering these stories.
They knew shortly after I made my initial visit that I wanted to create a kind of painting, not individual cushions with single discrete symbols, but the whole salvation story there to behold. And so once they understood conceptually that that was my challenge and my desire for the space, then they gave me a lot of time.
After familiarizing herself with the space and the committee's expectations, Kapickian retreated to her secluded Chesapeake Bay studio to begin the design process.
It took a year and a half for her to do the design. We got it in kind of stages. We saw small drawings, and that took a whole year and a half until we saw the actual large drawings and the color-coded drawings.
After the church heard my initial ideas, I then went into my studio and developed a concept of drawings and how the piece would work. And so I presented this to them with one done in color at the bottom with colored paper. And on the basis of this, then I moved to the next step, which was to translate all the drawings into color with the yarn.
Kapickian used the same Persian wool yarn that would be used in the cushions to conceptualize the colors in her mind.
And I do tend to think in color. Of course, I love color. I mean, we're talking about a salvation story, so I can't imagine telling God's story without using a symbolic representation of every single color that ever was. So it's all in a very natural way, but as far as how I arrived at it, I went to the hardware store and I bought several, I think it was 4x8 pieces of plywood, and then sawed them up into sizes like this and hammered nails in and put the numbers of this Paternaean yarn, which is what this was constructed out of, and I hung all the 410 colors on the boards. And I wrapped, I think I had 8 of these, and I ran them in a line around my studio.
It was a challenge for Kapickian to keep track of the hundreds of colors.
The funny thing is that after a while I had all the colors memorized in my head. So you could, I can't do it now, but if you handed me this color, I'd be able to tell you what number it was.
Once she had refined sketches of all 15 cushions, Kapickian glued scraps of yarn onto them to help visualize the interaction of the colors in the overall design. From these yarn mock-ups, Kapickian created small, then full-sized color-coded drawings on the templates provided by the upholsterer, indicating exactly which colors should be used in the process. Kapickian knew precisely what she wanted, but in order for the stitchers to execute the needlepoint, it was necessary to have the designs transferred onto needlepoint canvas.
Ann Dwiggins came to me. I think she called or visited a fair number of needle workshops, talked to me about the project, and she was interviewing different designers or different people who could put this project on canvas, because she had a designer already, but not someone who was capable of putting it on needlepoint canvas. That wasn't her area. And we talked for a long time, and she interviewed other shops and decided that she liked my style, I guess, you know, the way I would deal with it. And that's how it came to be.
Meta Whitcomb is the owner of Stitchworks, a needlepoint shop in Washington, D.C.'s DuPont Circle neighborhood. Whitcomb worked hard to transfer the nuances of Kapickian's flowing designs onto the square grid of the needlepoint canvas.
Anytime you're working with an angle on a square grid pattern, what you're working with is giving the appearance of something, but you can't make that same little point that you can with a real fine drawing pencil, like she could. So there was a challenge, how to keep her shapes and curves and fine points and all of those things, giving the illusion, because that's what you're working with, is the illusion, and having it come out as close to her fine line drawing as we could. So it was a challenge.
Whitcomb first used a special pen to transfer the drawings, then painted over those lines with colors corresponding to the yarns being used.
I spent a whole summer doing it. It's slow. And I worked on it. I took the summer off from the shop and worked on it most of that time. It's tedious, and they're very large.
While Whitcomb was finishing up the 15 canvases, the Needlepoint Committee at Abiding Presence was busy recruiting volunteer stitchers from the congregation.
We've been talking about this project and talking about it in the newsletter. They've been hearing about it forever, so they knew what it was about. And so we had a sign-up sheet, and we set up 4 classes, and people came.
Well, I was kind of attracted to it. I thought it would be a new way to learn, be a good way to learn a new skill, because I've never done anything along these lines before. And just kind of thought it would be an interesting, neat thing to do.
We held classes in the evening and taught everybody who was interested how to needlepoint. We had blank canvases for them learning the basic stitch. And then once they got that, we then gave them this 4x4 canvas with some colors of thread. And they took those home and worked on them. They brought them back to the next meeting, and we went over them and helped people who were having problems deal with those problems.
You had to think constantly when you're first learning any new subject. You constantly have to have your mind in gear, and you can't be thinking about anything else. So for the first go-around, you didn't watch TV. You didn't necessarily talk to anybody else. You know, you learned. But we learned on small squares, and Meta would critique them and tell us what we did wrong and make us go backwards and redo them again and again until they were correct, which really helped a great deal.
Although many of the volunteers had previously worked in needlepoint, few had done the basket weave stitch, which is commonly used for church kneelers.
It works with the grain of the canvas and makes a much stronger piece of work when you finish, because the grain of the canvas and the yarn will then marry each other. That is, they will blend together and be very tight and be a firm background. When you think about the kneeler, people are going to be plowing down maybe 150 pounds, that's 75 pounds per knee, onto the kneeler, so they have to have a substance to withstand that weight.
Once the volunteers perfected the basket weave stitch, the actual canvases were handed out.
I remember I was really excited to start it. The canvas that they gave me was really appealing to me, and I don't know, I found it difficult to put it down once I started it. I'm not disciplined enough to put something down and go start another project. If I've got something going, I have to keep going at it.
Kathy Peters is a member of Abiding Presence and has been stitching since the beginning of the project. Though Peters had never tried needlepoint before, she found it very easy to learn. Peters demonstrated the very intricate basket weave stitch.
I'm going to take two lengths of thread, approximately 18 inches long, and I'm going to run them through the needle. Essentially what you do is you knot the thread and come through the front or the top of the canvas, go through and bring it up through the back of the canvas and cross over the stitches, and it goes at a diagonal, and you go up the crosswise threads at the diagonal, and then you come back down, and the stitches will be running this way, as in a weave, and then you come down, and then when you get to the end, you go right back up again. So essentially, when you can see the top stitch going across, that's what we call the ladder, and the bottom stitch was called a pole. What I'm going to do now is catch the thread, and I'm going to take the needle and run it through the back of the canvas, running it behind the stitches approximately 1 inch, and then slipping it or clipping it off. It's really hard to run the needle through the back of the canvas through the yarn, so what I've taken is a piece of leather, and I push the needle through the back end with this piece of leather, and then I pull it out, the needle out through the top with the needle nose pliers.
Well, I looked at the diagrams they gave. It took me a long, long time, for example, to figure out what up rows. She was talking about going up rows and down rows, and it took me an awful long time to figure out what those were.
In order to see the fine detail of their work, the stitchers agreed that a good light source is necessary. In fact, Kathy Peters did the majority of her needlepoint in the same chair near a window in her family room.
I took the chair all the time. Yeah, I would be sitting in it, or they would want to sit in it, or one of my daughters would be sitting in it, and I'd say I need to have my chair because I wanted to work on it, and they got tired of having me hog the same chair all the time.
It does take a lot of time, and she hasn't been doing it for a while, but when she was normally sitting there on the couch just stitching.
And during soccer practices?
During soccer practice, she would sit on the sidelines stitching.
So far, all the canvases have really been good. Everybody has taken excellent care of them. One of them got wet, but it dried very well, and we just smoothed it out and left it dry flat. That's the most serious thing that has happened to them. And we've been walking on eggshells because you have to stop and figure. They're in 15 different homes. So every home has different things in it, and you don't know what can go wrong with them.
So we've been stitching from October '94 to roughly 3.5 years of stitching. I'd kind of hoped that that would go a little faster, but this is a tremendous area of stitching. I think, well, I don't want to give figures. I'm not going to remember them exactly right off the top of my head, but it's a very large area of needlepoint to stitch. And I think someone figured that it takes roughly an hour to do a square inch, so you can see it's time-consuming.
I probably spent anywhere from 1 to 2 hours a day on it for the most part. It became like a rigorous discipline, sort of. And kept working at it, and sometimes I began, I'm never going to get this done.
Moore's cushion took almost 3 years to complete, and at one point he even began counting stitches to keep himself going.
Well, the main picture, I remember I had 118,632 stitches in it, and the entire thing I came up with a number of 176,067.
The sizes of the cushions and the speed of the stitchers vary, and because of this, some were finished faster than others.
The first one I did approximately 6 months, and then I finished up some others for other people that couldn't finish. Spent 2 or 3 or 4 months on each one.
Sue Snyder served as the stitching coordinator for the project.
But my main job was just keeping in contact with all the stitchers, making sure they had no questions, making sure they had their yarns, their needle, you know, anything that they needed for the job. And if they were getting upset or disappointed or just bogged down, then you worked with them and pulled them back, you know, to the whole subject. And it worked well.
You could get excited about what was going to happen, but you just really had no idea until now that we're seeing some of the needlepoint completed, and with the color, it just blows you away.
As the volunteers completed their work, the canvases were returned to the needlepoint shop to be checked for missed stitches and other problems.
My involvement since then, or more recently, has been to check the finished kneelers to make sure that there were no missing stitches. The people who've been stitching them have been very careful about that, but having missing stitches in needlepoint can be tough, especially along the line where you change color.
Whitcomb marked the problems using Straetmans. The missing stitches were then carefully woven into the existing work.
Mr. Dwiggins has been doing most of the missed stitches in that you can weave in behind and then come up and do the one stitch and then weave back through, and that puts it in.
After the cushions are perfected, they are sent to a needlepoint finisher to be blocked and upholstered. Whitcomb describes the blocking process.
It's pinned onto a surface that's relatively easy to pin into, like Homasote or something like that. And it's made straight, usually by spraying the backing, not the background, but the back of it, with water, or by holding steam, either from a professional steam machine or just from a steam iron, down low, very, very close to it. And what that does is it dampens that starch, which is holding this in shape, and it allows you to move the canvas. So you, on this Homasote or whatever you use as a blocking surface, you have straight lines, and you pin this down, usually with T-pins. You can use aluminum nails that don't rust. It's pinned on straight lines, pulled into shape, pulled back into shape. If you can't get it perfectly straight the first time, then you do it again.
Nancy Lukowski of Fancy Work Finishing is the upholsterer for the project.
With their project, I went in and measured, and I block out each piece. And then you have to sew your corners together, and you cut out fabric for the bottom, which is hand sewn on. Then there's the filling. It's cutting that to size and inserting that.
The upholstery process takes Lukowski from 3 to 4 weeks per cushion. Once they are finished, the cushions are returned to the church one by one.
And I'm excited about the prospect of seeing them in the church when they're all done, because I think they're just going to be stunning. Seeing that church and envisioning those all there, I think that's the right backdrop for those particular designs, too.
The cushions were designed to be a complete and continuous work of art, and participants found it difficult to pick a favorite.
Oh, gracious. That's really hard to say at this point because they haven't all been completed. I'm really having trouble narrowing it down because they're all so vibrant and they seem very different even though they're tied in together. But I particularly like, for example, the way the Exodus is portrayed, Noah and the flood. I guess I like them all. I really can't narrow that down.
Probably Christmas. Christmas is a very pretty one, very dramatic, and shows you a lot. It really does. Tells you a lot in there. But the front ones have beautiful colors in them. The front three that go across the front of the altar, abiding presence cushions, they have very, very vivid colors in them, so it's really striking to look at.
After years of planning and countless stitches, the cushions are nearing completion. When all 15 cushions are finished, the Lutheran Church of the Abiding Presence will have a stunning work of art dedicated to the glory of God, not to mention something to kneel on.
I think it was a good idea because I sometimes slip kneeling on the floor, and I think that older folks would really like it.
We asked Rich Moore what he thought about people kneeling on his cushion.
I might have a heart attack. If anything happens to it, I think a lot of us might just have a few heart palpitations or something.
Stitchers say they took away more from the project than just stitching skills.
I think the most impressionable thing with the cushions was not probably what came out of the cushions. It had nothing to do with stitching, but the comradeship that was built between the stitchers in meeting as often as they did and getting to know them and know about their families and stuff, because you would talk as you're working. And that has nothing to do with the stitching, but it really brought a togetherness, you know, within the church itself, which is an offshoot of it, but very, very important, and made a lot of depth to the whole project.
And I think that it's just a really good feeling to know that you're doing something that's really extraordinary, really special, something that's going to be around for a couple of 100 years, a work of art that can be appreciated by so many people in the years to come as well, that we're leaving sort of a legacy behind of our commitment and our love of God and wanting to make our place of worship as beautiful as possible. And I think that's an important thing to give.
One of the neat things about this is that it is done by the community. It's been supported by the community, and it has been stitched by the community. If you look at the cushions, the stitching is different on each. People stitch differently. Some stitch real tight, some stitch looser. And so it's really a story of a people. You know, it's Mrs. Krupickian's story, and then Metta's work, and then Nancy Lukowski. It's all of the stitchers. It's the people who have contributed their dollars so that this might come. And one thing I think I've got to say is that when we started this, we really had the vision of doing something to the glory of God that would say, kind of like the medieval cathedrals, these stone cutters would work, and their work attests to us now how they felt about God. And hopefully in some way this will say to people, this is how these people felt about God, and gave the best they could to show their love of God. And so I'm hoping to future generations this will say a little bit about us and how we felt about God.